Hey everyone, so I've got quite the surprise here for you guys. I've got two very special guests here. We are here to talk about the Joe Rogan issue. So my first special guest here is Kyle Kulinski from Secular Talk. How you doing, man?
What's up, buddy? How's it going, man?
I'm doing well. And my second special guest is Mike Figueredo, who's the host of the Humanist Report. How you doing, Mike?
Hey, man, I'm doing really well. Glad to be here.
That's really awesome. So, as you guys know, they got into it very heatedly over on Twitter. They got into a pretty big beef over the Joe Rogan issue, where Joe Rogan he went on Alex Jones's show recently, and I just saw a video of his deposition, by the way. It's kind of random, but anyways, so...
I was just watching that, too.
Yeah, it was very interesting. So I'll pan it out to Kyle to kind of talk about the situation and kind of, I guess drag us into it.
Yeah, so Mike and I, we spoke about it on Twitter publicly, but then we also spoke in DMs, and I don't know. I don't think our disagreement is as big as it may have looked publicly necessarily.
I agree with that.
Yeah, as soon as he started clarifying stuff, I was like, okay, we're not as far off as I think we are. I think my only issue really is whether or not Joe Rogan is actually, quote, part of the problem and what part of the problem means. Because, so are a lot of his guests odious right-wingers who are have a deleterious effect on the national discourse? Yes. I mean, and I think that, when you look at my record, for example, going after Alex Jones, I probably have more videos on Alex Jones than anybody has going on Alex Jones, because it was like a staple of the show for, I do multiple clips per week just making fun of him and ripping him to shreds. And even with characters like Sam Harris or Jordan Peterson, and actually it's not even necessarily fair to those two to bring them up in the same breath as Alex Jones, because there's other people who I would honestly say are way worse than Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, like Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder. I was thinking about that the other day, that they've been on his show, and not only have they been on his show, but in the case of Ben Shapiro, that podcast had an insane number of views, where my podcast on there didn't reach the number of views that Ben Shapiro had. But I was thinking about it afterwards, and it strikes me that his podcast is kind of which is the famous country that's known for being neutral on everything? Is it I think it's Switzerland. I think it's Switzerland, where even during World War II, they were yeah, we're kind of just waffling in the middle here, and we're randomly out of every war ever. And that's kind of how I view his podcast. I think he has this forum where he's this, and I don't mean this in a negative way. I think he's kind of naive, but he also means well. And he fancies himself relatively apolitical, even though we can kind of nail him down when we get to specific issues. But so in that sense, my feeling was that if you say he's part of the problem because he's buddies with Alex Jones and he was on Alex Jones' show, I think that's too strong of a denunciation, in the sense that we being left-wing hosts are kind of shutting the door to an outlet that's actually super important in the long run, where we can provide a gateway out of a lot of terrible beliefs that a lot of people have. Because in my experience, Rogan's audience, while it overall leans right, they are open to left-wing voices. And, I think that my podcast on there proved it. Some of Abby Martin's podcast, Jimmy Dore's podcast, Andrew Yang, Tulsi Gabbard, so on and so forth. So I guess my only issue was that it was too broad of a comment, where I felt and I know people are trying to paint it as, oh, it's because Kyle is friends with Rogan. I am friends with Rogan. That is true. And so that is a normal human nature. You're going to be biased in that direction. But I also just think it's objectively true that he's kind of a waffler centrist who views his podcast as Switzerland, and that if we start making proclamations like you made on Twitter, that we're kind of shutting the door to something that is actually super beneficial for getting our views out there to more people, which I think is my main concern.
Yeah. So let me preface this discussion with saying that I really, really would encourage people who are either on Kyle's side or my side to recognize that we are both arguing in good faith. I'm not assuming Kyle is arguing on his side because he's friends with Joe or thinks that Joe is above criticism. And I'm not arguing because I hate Joe Rogan or whatever, and I think that we should shut him down or deplatform him. We both just have a disagreement. So don't think that there's any underlying nefarious agenda. And a second thing I'll say before I address my point is, Kyle, if you razor fist me throughout this discussion,
I wouldn't do that.
I will be so mad. So you're gonna have to handle me with kid gloves because I'm just starting out, man. I'm too young to die. No, but in all seriousness, so when Kyle says that me saying Joe Rogan is part of the problem, I actually do acknowledge that may turn people off. Now let me say this: do I still think that Joe Rogan is part of the problem? I do, but what I take away from him being part of the problem isn't necessarily as nefarious as people may think. Like, I'm not saying he's a horrible human being, and I think that needs to be explained. And I think that what Kyle is pointing to here is we need to more meaningfully communicate our views and what the problem is. So I do think that that's really important. My one thing that I think we should kind of dive a little bit deeper into is this question of legitimization, because I know that Kyle, you said that you don't necessarily think that it's Joe Rogan legitimizing Alex Jones. And I do think that that's something worth exploring, because I think that we sometimes inadvertently legitimize people, even if we're not intending to. So I don't necessarily, like, I think that Joe Rogan acknowledges that Alex Jones is a dipshit, because, I mean, who couldn't, right? But I do think that it is important for us to look at whether or not what we say and how we communicate and who we choose to communicate can legitimize people either wittingly or unwittingly. And that's not to say that Joe Rogan is trying to prop up Alex Jones. What I'm saying is that it's important that we acknowledge just simply that by him, someone with credibility talking to Alex Jones, people may take away from that just kind of psychologically, oh, maybe he's not so bad if Joe's willing to talk to him. And I think those are kind of the two things. Maybe you can kind of add to that, Kyle, the part of the problem and legitimization. I think that's the crux of our disagreement for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, so my response to that in terms of, is he legitimizing him or not? My response is simply, I don't know, because the other school of thought is, for a guy like Alex Jones, you give him enough rope and he's going to hang himself. And that to go actually back to the thing you mentioned before, the deposition, like, I was just watching that before we're having this conversation now, and it was kind of amazing because you see this guy, Alex Jones is obviously a charlatan, and when you put in front of him, like, the direct video clips of him saying the things he said about Sandy Hook, and then watching him try to squirm to get out of it when he's stone cold caught, he basically has nowhere to go. So he just is like, that was kind of out of context or something. And, like, the only context in which the thing he said made sense is if right before he said it, he said something like, what I'm about to say, I mean the opposite of. So, like, I don't know if he's legitimizing him, because I always used to get mad at looking at those, like, the 98% like rates on the Alex Jones podcasts. And then one day I realized, it was this last time he went on Rogan's show, that, like, no, I think the overwhelming majority of the people who are hitting like because they're watching the equivalent of, like, a true TV show where the car is crashing going 95 miles an hour. And, like, they realize that this guy is legitimately mentally unstable. And it's one of those things where they just can't look away. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I clicked that podcast faster than humanly possible when I saw that Alex Jones was back on Rogan. First of all, I didn't believe it. And then when I saw it, I was like, this is insane. And I grabbed the popcorn and I was like, let's watch this. Yep. So I think maybe it's possible that we don't give people enough credit on that front, that we think, like, and this is always a point I've made in regards to not just Alex Jones, but other people on the right as well. My argument to many on the left is, what are you afraid of? Like, we actually have better arguments than them, and many of them will actually self-destruct. I think you saw that when Rogan pressed Steven Crowder on the issue of marijuana. I think you saw that when Rogan pressed Candace Owens. I think you saw that when Rogan pressed Rubin on his libertarian deregulation nonsense. So even though it's something that's, like, kind of mocked a little bit nowadays for good reason, because Dave Rubin tried to become the champion of this thing, and he's just a clown and a fool. But, like, it actually is true that, generally speaking, the marketplace of ideas, the best ideas win. It's not always true, but it is very often true. So that's my general thoughts on that. Now, in terms of, I was talking about this with Corin, and it was interesting to, bounce ideas off each other on this front. I don't totally disagree with you either, Mike, in the sense that I think that for debates, I would never want to legitimize a position that I find abhorrent that is not debatable. So the point I made to Corin is like, I would never debate whether or not the Holocaust happened. I would never debate whether or not the earth is flat, because I find that so beyond the pale that just the setup, the premise of like, okay, here's this thing, 50% on this side, 50% on this side, and now you guys fight, and whoever's better at sophistry ends up winning. Like, no, that's not fair. That doesn't give that issue credit, that you're biasing it up front. But the other part I said to Corin was, for conversations, I basically have the polar opposite view, which is anything goes for conversations, because conversations are conversations, and there's no inherent legitimization of any position. So, I don't know. Those are my general thoughts on it. Maybe you'll disagree in parts there, but I just think that it's possible that with guys like Alex Jones, you give him enough rope and he's going to hang himself. And I also think that when Joe Rogan fails, it's usually because he's just not equipped to respond. But like, if he knew certain things, he would actually respond and press the person. And that's the other thing that I think is important to point out here, because we have seen him push back on Candace Owens. We have seen him push back on Dave Rubin. I think there are some issues where he's genuinely reactionary, where we can debate with him. But I think on a lot of issues, he would surprise you, where if he knew the things you might know, Mike, then he would actually use that and push back against somebody like Alex Jones or anybody else.
Yeah, which I would respond then, if you can't, because I agree with you, and I think I even covered when he talked to Dave Rubin and when he talked to Candace Owens. So there are genuine instances where I think he's doing a fantastic job, but there are going to be areas, like you said, where he's unequipped. He doesn't know. So my response to that is, that's why you definitely should, if you're interested in kind of just exploring all of these ideas, bring on more lefties. I mean, David Pakman has been trying to get on Joe Rogan for a while. There's other lefties. He can bring on Cenk. He can bring on Sam Cedar. He can bring on Jimmy Dore and you again. So that would be my only thing, is if you don't know how to respond to all of these reactionary positions, then what you should do is just bring on more views that people are going to be exposed to. Now, the one thing that I say about legitimization, and it really is, like, I don't think that there's any concise takeaway. I think that the struggle which you and I are currently dealing with, I think it is important, because there's no clean, I think, argument that you can take away. But this is my view. So when he brings on someone like Jordan Peterson, for example, and Jordan Peterson will lie about transgender people, and even if they're not talking about trans people the whole time, even if they don't talk about trans people at all, Jordan Peterson is essentially the Anita Bryant to trans people. He's the Anita Bryant of our generation. He traffics in hate for trans people. He lies. So even if he goes on the show and they don't talk about the trans issue, Jordan Peterson is still being humanized. Jordan Peterson is still being looked at as someone who is not doing damage to the trans community. So if I were to bring on David Duke, for example, to the Humanist Report, and we never touched on white supremacy, but we talked about video games and we talked about cookies, someone might take away from that, oh, he's just like me. He's human, just like me. But the problem with that in humanizing these types of figures who have objectively horrific beliefs is that they never allow the people who they demonize to be humanized. You see what I mean? Like, Jordan Peterson, he wouldn't allow trans people to be humanized. Joe Rogan isn't bringing on ContraPoints to talk about trans issues. So if he doesn't know how to respond, because I think that there are some questions in life that are difficult, that everyone isn't able to answer. Like, I can talk about climate change relatively intelligently, I think, but I'm not a scientist. So there are some areas where we're not going to have that knowledge. So I think that really the way that you counteract that is by bringing on more lefties. Now, with that being said, I actually agree with you that we shouldn't not talk to anyone. But I think that really the underlying issue that not just you and I are facing, Kyle, but a lot of people on the left are facing, is how do we engage with the right in a constructive way that doesn't throw the left under the bus? How do we engage with them so that way we're not helping them? And I think that Destiny is a really good template for this, because he brings on everyone. He talks to the most odious figures, but you're never going to leave thinking, oh, wow, this person is legitimate. He'll put their views out in the open, and then he'll kind of expose them. Like you said, he'll give them enough rope to hang themselves. But I think that he's doing it in a constructive way. So to me, and maybe I'm maybe people disagree with this. I do think we should talk to anybody, but I am careful about saying if we're going to talk to people as members of the left, we should do it in a constructive way. So if you talk to anyone, if you talk to Alex Jones, it has to be in a constructive way. If you talk to Jordan Peterson, you've got to do it in a constructive way. And when I say that Joe Rogan is part of the problem, I'm not saying that he's equally as odious as someone like Jordan Peterson, because I genuinely think he just doesn't, like you said, he's kind of naive, and I don't mean that to be condescending. I think that he just doesn't understand why Jordan Peterson's views are problematic and harmful. When I say he's part of the problem, I just mean that every once in a while we do things that are harmful. I think I was part of the problem when I brought H.A. Goodman on my podcast, for example. But the point is that in realizing that you are part of the problem in some areas, you can course correct. You can be introspective. So I'm not saying cancel Joe Rogan, shut him out. We should stop watching. We should boycott. I'm saying if you're going to bring on these people and do it irresponsibly, then you can expect pushback. And that's the pushback I got when I brought on H.A. Goodman, and rightfully so. So it's just a matter of, overall, again, I agree. We can't just be insulated. We can't only talk to leftists, and I'm actually the worst offender because I don't think I've ever brought on a conservative. So I'm bad at this, so I'm not the right person. But if we do talk to the right, we just have to be responsible, because I think that as you grow, so does your responsibility. And I feel like we all kind of have this innate responsibility that we sometimes cast aside. Like, you and I would benefit technically if we lied about like the Green New Deal or Medicare for all, but we don't do that because we have a sense of responsibility. We don't do that because that also is tied directly to our credibility. So even if maybe 10,000 people watch, me lying about the Green New Deal, if I say it's not going to cost anything because that technically helps our side, well, then not just 10,000 people are going to come away thinking, oh, the Green New Deal doesn't cost anything, because that talking point that I used will spread. So it's just a matter of, I guess the overall point is that what I want from Joe Rogan is not to communicate that he's a bad person. It's just for him to do better. That's essentially all that I'm saying. And I do acknowledge that saying he's part of the problem isn't the best way to win anyone over, even if I do think it's the case. It's just a matter of me articulating what is the problem with Joe Rogan. It's not that there are specific disagreements that I have with him here and there. It's just that overall, I think that he needs to understand that in bringing on someone like Jordan Peterson, you are doing real harm to people who literally lies about transgender people. So tell me what you think about that, because I kind of feel like we're not that big in disagreement. It's just that we kind of reach the same conclusion, albeit in different ways.
Okay, so there's a lot of the stuff there that I'll respond to. We got to get in every nook and cranny of this, because I think you have to get like super specific to actually get to the crux of any disagreements we have. So first of all, let me just say the criticisms you laid out of Joe, if you were making those criticisms of me, or you were making those criticisms of Sahil, or you're making those criticisms of Dave Rubin, or you're making those criticisms of anybody who fancies themselves a news person or a political commentator, I 100% agree with you, and then this conversation isn't even happening. So I think you're making substantive points, but I just think there's a little bit of a category error here as well. And by that I mean, should Joe Rogan bring on more lefties? Yes. In fact, that's one of my main goals, is to try to get more lefties on Joe Rogan, which is another reason why we're having this conversation. But for him, he's actually upfront about the fact that he's a comedian, and he often says he's an idiot. And so he's just kind of doing what he wants to do with his giant platform. And I mean, it started out with him like literally selling fleshlights. I mean,
he literally sold fleshlights.
Literally, that was the sponsor for his podcast for years. So what? he's a comedian first and foremost, and he fancies himself pretty apolitical. And like, he's brought on people from, as far right as Alex Jones and as far right as Ben Shapiro and Steven Crowder. And he's brought on people as far left as Peter Joseph, who that dude makes me and you look like Bill O'Reilly. He's so far left. I'm serious about that. Like, in fact, when he says stuff, I'm like, I don't even get what you're saying. You're so far left. It's kind of crazy. But like, point is, he's brought on so many people of so many different stripes, and so many people who aren't involved in politics at all and are MMA people. So it's just that he doesn't view himself in that way for that criticism to be relevant against him. Whereas every single thing you just said against Dave Rubin, I 100% agree with the criticism of Dave Rubin, because that's his whole position, is political commentator talking about these important issues. and he's made a point of like using his identity as a gay man and like the last liberal left to basically cover for insanely odious right-wing views and pretend that they're not that bad. So I just want to be clear that I'm not denying this dynamic that you've laid out where, you know, this was part of what we were saying on Twitter, and it's a good point. I just think it's a little misdirected. Now, when it comes to Rogan, I know you are a lot more nuanced, and you're definitely not saying like shut him down, tune him out, morally condemn him, shame him, and all that stuff, and cancel him. But I need you to understand that a lot of people are saying that, and I do think that that hurts us. And you know, I was thinking about it earlier. Like, even I, oftentimes, my initial reaction is to go, why'd you do that? Like when he brought back on Alex Jones. But like, think about it. Would I go on Dave Rubin's show today? Yeah, I would. I would go on his show, and I would expose his audience to a shitload of good views. But I guarantee you, you know what would happen? People would take a screenshot of me on Dave Rubin's show, and then they would circulate it all over Twitter, and then people would honestly believe now I'm part of the problem, and now I'm right-wing or something because
Really?
I went on
I
Dave
don't
Rubin's
think
show.
so.
No, 100% Sahil. If you don't think that, you are disconnected from the Twitter sphere.
But
because
you went
I
on
see
Fox News and no one said that.
Yeah, but Dave Rubin's show, I think, is in almost a special category at this point where people would come after me. And listen, we're gonna be able. I'll tell you guys off air. I'm not going on a Rubin show. I haven't been invited on Rubin's show. But we're gonna talk off air, and there's gonna be basically a test of this theory, and we'll see who's right. And I bet a lot of money that I'm gonna be right, and that people are gonna crop out a picture and they're gonna post it all over Twitter, and they're gonna be like, oh, and they're gonna make fun of it and act like. I can't get into any more specifics, but they're going to act.
Now I want to know right now.
I'll tell you off air because it's not a set thing and whatever. It's a long conversation. But I have I also want to say, because I jotted down a million things while you were talking, I don't blame you for platforming H.A. Goodman because you couldn't have known what H.A. Goodman was going to become.
No, I did, though. I just thought I had the cognitive dissonance, right? Because he was obviously sensationalist and clickbaity. What my thought then was that it is a net benefit if I try to platform someone who is progressive, even if they may be a little bit kooky. But that was me being naive and not listening to that internal voice. Mike, he's a dumbass. What the fuck are you doing? So I do blame myself. But thank you because I do blame myself.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that it's funny that you blame yourself and I'm like, I don't blame you at all. But it's like, this is, this gets to a difference where on many social issues, I fancy myself pretty libertarian and like live and let live. And like, I actually have an answer to one of the things you brought up, which is like, how do we get our ideas out more? And my answer is engage on specific issues. So for example, Sahil said this in his video about me. He was like kind of making fun of the idea that I said that we should counter argue and debunk and, you know, basically like pick apart
like specific points
that these people say.
Oh, but specifically of Alex Jones, though. That was specifically Alex Jones.
Right, but I actually think it's funny because I actually think that that's like the best example of my approach to this being correct, which is I've done so many segments exposing him for the absolute moron that he is, and I've done it by picking apart his arguments where he says insane things and then posting it on my channel, and then the videos blow up. And then, yeah, I guarantee you I've converted so many people away from like falling down that rabbit hole and ending up being an Alex Jones fan. So even though it sounds ridiculous, like, oh, really? You're gonna pick apart the guy who says, you know, whatever, that there are intergenerational child molesters or something. It sounds ridiculous, but yes, you do it. You expose it for what it is, and you let people know that like this isn't normal. So it gets back to the normalization point that you were making. Like, no, our job is to say, no, this isn't normal, and now let me break it down for you how it's not normal. And on the issue of trans rights, which you brought up, I have 100% agreement with you on the issue of trans rights, 100% disagreement with Jordan Peterson. But here's the thing. When it comes to Joe Rogan, he actually disagrees with us on this issue, and he actually has very reactionary views on this issue. So, you know, we briefly got into it on the podcast when it was me versus him, and that was one thing. The other thing was the voting age. But like, yes, there's a bunch of issues where he just flat out doesn't agree with us. So for us to say to him, like, come on, man, what this guy's doing is genuinely terrible and affects the trans community in a negative way. So why you shouldn't really platform him? His response would basically be to us like, no, I don't agree with you, full stop. I agree with him. And that's an issue where Joe Rogan is wrong, and we should be there face to face with him to further argue it out. And I think my whole argument goes back to, we need to take an approach where we can say, I'm not going to really go down the rabbit hole of guilt by association, and I'm not going to do any broad dismissals. I'm going to say, you're wrong for this reason, and this reason, and I would love to flesh that out with you and be face to face with you and really dive into the specifics of it.
I don't think anyone was doing guilt by association, though, because, I mean, Mike, you weren't saying that, like, Joe Rogan believes in the shitty things that Alex Jones believes, right? You were specifically talking about platforming.
I think that Joe is a pretty smart guy. I think he's personable. I'm not guilt by association.
Said, though, the tweet you were responding to, what were they saying? Because they 100% did guilt by association, which is why many people were triggered, even people who are not, Joe Rogan fanboys. People were like, I don't think that's fair, because the original tweet that Mike was responding to, it showed a picture of Joe Rogan on Alex Jones' show. So again, the screenshot police here. Oh my God, he's talking to this person who's a bad person. And then it said, this is happening the same day that a Sandy Hook parent committed suicide. And this guy was a plaintiff in the case against Alex Jones. Now that's so many layers removed. Like, look at how many hoops you had to jump through to make that point. As if Joe Rogan knew that happened, as if he wouldn't be affected by it and think it's like a terrible thing if you told it to him. See, that's what I mean. That is the textbook definition of guilt by association. He's on this guy's show. This guy's a bad person. Somebody committed suicide who was a plaintiff in the case against Alex Jones. How could Joe legitimize him, when something like this just happened? And that's all. Like, he doesn't know. He's just a dude who's with his friend from the 1990s who's admittedly an insane person who he, for whatever reason, is back talking to. But I don't like that is, of course, guilt by association. And that's the stuff that I think gives people on the left this, we have this reputation of like, you're petty, censorious, little authoritarian weasels who are willing to do shit like that. And I want us to basically work overtime to not become that stereotype. You see what I mean?
I do see what you mean, but I will say that I don't think it's guilt by association, because I do think that we already knew that Joe Rogan and Alex Jones were friends. So it's not necessarily that he's shitty because he knows Alex Jones. It's what he chooses to do publicly. So, for example, like, I have a cousin who just like a month ago shared an InfoWars thing about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wanting to ban farting cows. And I had to say, cousin, I love you, but this is fucking dumb. And I love my cousin. I'm associated with my cousin, but that doesn't necessarily make me guilty. It's just that, sorry, love you, but you're not coming on the Humanist Report anytime. So it's just a matter of, because Joe Rogan is an intelligent person who is personable, who may not disagree with us, but because Alex Jones is so beyond the pale, for him to go on the show, I think it communicates to people, well, he must not be that bad if Joe Rogan is going on his show. So it's not that he's guilty because he knows and is friends with Alex Jones. It's because publicly on a platform, you kind of, in a way, legitimize these ideas. Another thing that I wanted to touch on was the category issue, since he's not technically a political commentator, that the criticism of, political criticism doesn't necessarily apply to him. And I do take issue with that notion, because I think that in a time when everything is politicized and politics is everything, if you're going to talk about politics, then functionally you become a political commentator for the duration of that episode. So if I'm going to bring on Jimmy Dore, for example, and I'm going to talk about comedy, then I better know my shit. I better know who George Carlin is. You know what I mean? Because we're touching on an area where I need to be educated on. So I mean, if you're going to put on the hat of political commentator, then you've got to know your shit. And one thing that I'm struggling with is, how do we convince Joe Rogan to change his position on trans rights? Is it shaming? Is it trying to have a conversation? And that's what I'm struggling with. I don't know what will be more effective. I think your approach, Kyle, is probably more persuasive in the end. But I don't think that we can just kind of brush it off as he's just, he just likes talking to people. He's just a comedian. And I don't think that we can just give him a pass for that, because let
me be clear. I'm not talking about giving them a pass. What I'm talking about is, to steal an old phrase from Obama, we're using a hatchet when we need to use a scalpel. So that guy was saying that he's shitty for being on Alex Jones' show. And also, Joe actually agrees with you in the sense that he did, like Milo Yiannopoulos, he said, nope, not buying it. I think you're full of shit. I think you're a provocateur. I don't think you believe a word you're saying. So he didn't let him on the podcast anymore. And he's done that with others. Now, for whatever reason, and my guess is it's because he's been a friend with him since literally the 1990s, he doesn't see that in Alex Jones, or he's maybe lying to himself about that when it comes to Alex Jones. But you could also, every criticism you just made against Joe for platforming Alex Jones, it's the same thing for Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro. Those guys are incredibly odious.
I agree, yeah.
We're talking about a guy, Steven Crowder, literally says to this day that Hitler was something like a liberal socialist, is how he phrased it.
It's an oxymoron anyways.
He sells shirts that say socialism is for fags on it. Like, he literally
Ben Shapiro says he doesn't care about civilian casualties.
Yeah.
So these are the kinds of people that we're talking about. So it's a fact of reality that there are assholes in this world who have incredibly odious beliefs. It's also a fact of reality that there are Switzerland-like people out there, like Joe Rogan, who are relatively apolitical, and they're waffly as a motherfucker. What I'm saying is, with our approach, we don't retreat. We don't secede. We double down, and if anything, we go on the offense. And we make specific arguments, and we engage. And instead of having 30% of Joe Rogan's guests be left-wing, we make it so that it's at least 50% of his guests. And hopefully we chip away. And on some issues, I'm not naive enough to think we could change his mind on all issues. But on some issues, we actually end up winning in the long term. But again, what this requires is a total sea change in how the left thinks about these issues, where there are no more screenshot police who are like, you talk to this person, he talked to that person. Oh my God, you're all so canceled. And again, I know you're not saying that, but I know that there are so many who do, and I see it all the fucking time. Again, you would think Glenn Greenwald came out for pedophilia when he went on Tucker Carlson's show to talk about Russiagate, an issue he's been 100% right about, when CNN won't have him and MSNBC won't have him. So I'm tired of like the petty factionalized stuff, and I don't think we should feed into that at all. I think we should make a concerted effort to go in the opposite direction, but I also feel fear that in the process of me making this argument that, to certain characters, I become like, oh, now you're too far gone, and you're like, I've been called the free speech bro who thinks like that's the answer to everything. Like, no, it's not that I think it's the answer to everything. I just think that you have to be principled. And my main concern and the whole point of my show is really, we have to spread these left-wing ideas and make our sphere of influence as big as possible. And like the first thing I would lob off and say we're not doing this anymore is guilt by association. Even though you 100%, literally any criticism you can come up with right now of Alex Jones, not only will I agree with it, I'll probably go further. Literally any criticism of Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro you have, I will go further. Does it suck that Rogan has these people on and he falls for some of their BS? Yes. But there is no changing that through brute force by saying, you shouldn't associate with them anymore. The only way to change that is to say, all right, now it's my turn. Step aside. You go in there for a podcast. You sit down. You blow the roof off the fucking place by having all your ducks in a row. And also, you have to understand something. People can make the same argument you're making on the opposite side of this equation. And what I mean by that is, I think it was the second time I was on Rogan's podcast, I got a fact wrong. And the fact I got wrong was I said, all you have to do is go into Canada, and it doesn't matter who you are. You could be anybody, and you get free healthcare. I said that, and I was factually wrong. And when people pointed out to me after, the difference between me and Alex Jones and Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro is, of course, I have integrity, and I care about the truth. So what did I do? On my very next show, I said it in a segment. I said, listen, I was factually wrong, and here's the reality of the situation. I showed everybody exactly what I was referring to. There was an article where they said refugees get free health care, and my dumbass interpreted that as anybody could just walk into Canada and say, I declare I'm a refugee, and then they get free health care. That's not the reality. It's an official legal status that you have to apply for. So nobody could you can't just walk in there and get free health care, but if you are a refugee, you can get free health care. But I botched that fact, and using the line of thought that you just argued for, people who are right-leaning can look at Joe Rogan and say, blah, look at this beta cuck socialist pinko who's just letting this lefty run his mouth and get things wrong on his show. We're done with him from a right-wing perspective. So basically, I mean, to sum up my argument, my whole point is like, everybody just relax. All you have to do, all I want people to do is actually engage on the details of what we're talking about here. So that does mean a lot more conversation, a lot more rigorous debate. And then I think that honestly, in the long run, that does benefit the left, because historically it has, and we really do have way, way, way better arguments. So I think as soon as we shed this reputation that we now have of like, you're all the social justice warrior, censorious little goons, as soon as we shed that, then the sky's the limit. And I think that, I also think this stuff comes in waves, but that's a separate conversation. Like the left was big online around like the Obama era, 2008 or so, and then it took a rightward turn in like 2015 with the rise of Trump. I think the pendulum is going to go back in the other direction naturally, but I also think we need to be spearheading that, and the way to spearhead that is to basically take the approach that I'm advocating for.
I wanted to kind of get back to the Glenn Greenwald thing, because I think it really gets to a core issue that a lot of people have been struggling with, myself included. And that's, how do you engage in a constructive way with people on the right, so that way you don't jeopardize your principles, as you always say, Kyle, and also you make sure that you're not inadvertently legitimizing the right. So I actually disagree with you about the Rubin thing. If you were to go on Dave Rubin, the screenshot, and maybe this is just me, but I would say this is going to be awesome because Kyle is going to destroy. He's going to razor fist Dave Rubin. If I see you on Fox News, Kyle, I tune in because I'm ready to see an ass whooping, So I'm expecting you to go on and not sacrifice your principles and not legitimize the right. However, with Glenn Greenwald, and this is kind of something that I've struggled with, so there's no concrete takeaways that I have. I'm not sure. I'm kind of waffling on this one. When he goes on to talk about Russiagate, even if he's 100% correct, even if CNN and MSNBC won't bring him on, the problem is that by going on to Tucker Carlson's show just to attack the left, he is in a way kind of getting Tucker Carlson the credibility that he doesn't deserve, as if Tucker Carlson is legitimate and isn't as big as a fuck up as Rachel Maddow, for example. So it's a matter of maybe if Glenn Greenwald went on, and I can't tell him what to say, this is just, me thinking about this through how I would act. If I were to go on, I would say, yes, it was the case that the left largely was right about this collusion issue. However, this isn't just the left issue. The right was wrong about WMDs. They were wrong about Benghazi. So if you kind of just go on this platform and attack the left, then you're just reinforcing this narrative that left bad, even if technically you're right on that issue. So that's something that I'm struggling with, because Tucker Carlson is someone who I really do believe has odious views. And the way that a lot of these figures rope people in is by just throwing a little bit of bait. So for example, like Tucker Carlson, he oftentimes will agree. Like, he agreed with AOC on the Amazon deal. He agrees sometimes on economic populism, and he'll kind of rope you in that way. But once he gets you there, then you start finding out about the white supremacy. You start talking about thinking about his worldview that's really nefarious. And this is how it works on the left too. Like, I got messages from people during net neutrality. Like when I was talking about that, people tuned in on the right for net neutrality, and they said, look, I started to tune in because you were talking about this, and now you've convinced me and I'm a leftist. So it happens both ways. So I just feel like as members of the left, we have to try to make sure that we stop elevating people and legitimizing people who are overall bad. And if you're going to converse with someone like Tucker Carlson or Laura Ingraham, you have to do it using a very specific framework where you don't undermine the left. Destiny's a good example. Your Fox News appearances are a good example. Katie Halper's appearance on Laura Ingraham is a phenomenal example. So I'm curious to know what you think about that, because again, this is something that I actually am struggling with. I don't know that there's a very clean takeaway from this.
Okay, so we happen to stumble across an issue where I have really strong feelings on this one. So in the case of Tucker Carlson specifically, yes, he's a way better charlatan than anybody else on Fox News for the reasons you laid out. He does some pseudo-populist head fakes, and then that ropes people in, and then, at the end of the day, they end up supporting Donald Trump, who's the opposite of a populist, but also does fake populism in his own respect. So yes, he's kind of unique in that way, which makes him a little bit more of a threat in the sense that he can get a lot more popular than the assholes who don't even know what they're doing, or Sean Hannity, who's now preaching to all 75-year-old people and over. So
who's not a good propagandist.
No, he's not. I mean, he's relentless and he's been doing it forever, but yeah, his audience is rock solid, all 75-year-old plus old white men. So when it comes to Tucker, though, he's already a Fox host, and in the key time slot with millions of viewers. There is no Greenwald elevating him, legitimizing him. He's already there. He's already on the mountaintop. So when it comes to Greenwald going on there, even in the instance of what you just said, which is on Russiagate, him saying, hey, it turns out that there actually was no collusion, so would you look at that? The Democrats have been wrong. What he's doing there is he's opening up the door. Number one, what he's saying is true. So truth is always a defense. So we got to give him that. But then furthermore, you're opening up the door for people to go, well, this is weird. In my, stupid little Fox News brain, I thought that the Republicans are 100% right on this. The left is 100% wrong on this. And here we have this prominent leftist who's coming on, and he's talking about how not only is this narrative the correct narrative, but I know more about it than you do. So then, this doesn't happen with the majority of people on Fox News, not by a long shot, because many of them have concrete in their heads, okay? But with a small percentage, will they go, this is interesting. Let me look at what else. I'll follow Glenn Greenwald on Twitter and see what else he's talking about. And then, oh, look at this. He wrote an article. What's this article about? Oh, wow. It's whatever, a case against torture or a case against bigotry or a case against war or whatever it may be. And then you have not just a gateway into the alt-right or to the far right. There's a gateway out of the alt-right and the far right. And that's provided by people who are not lobbing, insults and shaming and posting screenshots. It's provided by people who are actually willing to go into the lion's den and let everybody know that, no, this is okay what we're doing here. Like, Tucker's not going anywhere. If they didn't fire him at this point with all the shit he got caught saying, he ain't going anywhere. So what are we going to do? We have to deal with this. How do we deal with this? Okay. One time Greenwald goes on and he talks about Russiagate. And like you said, he's attacking the Democratic narrative. I wouldn't say the left narrative, but the Democratic narrative.
That's right.
But then you got to remember, a week before, Glenn Greenwald was on Fox News. And he literally, at the end of his segment on Russiagate, I think it was, with Laura Ingraham, he called out Brazilian fascist Jair Bolsonaro right before Bolsonaro had an interview on Fox News. So all these people were tuning in Brazil, waiting to heap praise on their dear leader, emperor. And then here comes Glenn Greenwald to rain on the parade and say that Bolsonaro has connections to the assassination of a well-known politician, Marielle Franco, in Brazil. So I think that we need to start viewing these things more as opportunities than as like, oh, we're helping the other side. Because really, again, and I noticed it with Rogan in my particular instance, the opposite happened in my case, where I got so many messages where people were like, damn, like you really converted me back to the left. And that's the way to get these converts, is to actually engage, go in the lion's den, never compromise on your principles, never compromise on your beliefs, or in fact, argue for them ruthlessly. But yes, you do engage. And even in the case of somebody who's as terrible as Tucker Carlson. So this is one where I don't blame Glenn at all. I think it's actually a smart thing in the long run. And I think that if we all took this approach, the numbers for our side would skyrocket.
And I think that the way you describe that, Kyle, is why I'm kind of torn. because the point that you make about it being a gateway both ways, I do think that that's compelling, which is why I genuinely am struggling with it. The problem, and I think the reason why it's such a difficult thing is because we can't really quantify that. We don't know how many people were converting or not converting. We can't see the data,
and
so
I'd
it's
be more
so tough.
If I was wrong, I would admit it too, by the way. If there was some way to quantify it and I'm wrong, I'd say it.
But let me tell you, and because I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. So the way that I view, like, converting someone, for example, is kind of the way that I view the Democratic Party. Like, I don't think it's necessarily a matter of converting people and penetrating that bubble. I think it's getting people who are apolitical and catching them at that moment when they're developing their decision. So, like, my thing with the Democrats is, you know, and your thing too, all of our things, is you can't just go after moderate Republicans. You got to register new voters. And that's kind of the way that I'm viewing this. And I can't quantify this, so I don't know. But people who are apolitical, and this is why I'm concerned with the Glenn Greenwald thing, and I'm not 100% against it. I'm 50-50. Somebody who is apolitical, who's watching Fox News at the doctor's office, they might see, oh, well, this leftist is coming on and talking about how stupid the left is, you know, because of this Russiagate nonsense. So I guess that Fox News must be right. So for me, it's not necessarily a matter of how important it is to penetrate that right-wing bubble, because it is. But it's also a matter of how many apolitical people who are starting to develop political feelings and instincts are we able to convert. And that's something that I'm genuinely dealing with. Like, there have been times when, because we're deep in the progressive bubble. So when I saw Thomas Massey call out the I don't remember who he called it. I think it was after Trump bombed Syria, but he actually said something good, and he's a libertarian who's generally crazy. He said something that we agreed with, that we shouldn't bomb Syria, for example. And then I thought, wow, this guy must be one of the good ones. But then I look up more of his ideals and I think, oh, he's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. So, I mean, if we're already in that bubble, I think it's going to be really difficult to convince people. And you have to have a certain open mind to be convinced to begin with. Like, you have to be predisposed. So I think that, like, in the instance you described, Kyle, with the person who came back to the left, if you already kind of had those left instincts, it'll be easier. But I think that people in the right-wing bubble, a large portion, I don't know how large, they're probably too far gone. But my main concern is how many apolitical people are we converting? And again, there's no answer to that because we can't quantify. We could just speculate. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on that, because that's what's getting me right now, which is making me feel a little bit conflicted.
So I think that's a false dichotomy. And I actually think by doing what I'm describing, you get the best of both worlds, in the sense that you take a lot of apolitical people and get them interested. And I actually have a disagreement with you in terms of open-mindedness. I don't think that people need to have an open mind in order to change on political issues over time. And I think one of the reasons why I have such strong opinions on this is, dude, all you need is like 1 or 2 points of agreement, man. That's it. You get 1 or 2 tiny points of agreement, and then you extrapolate. And next thing you know, you got people going, oh, shit, he was right about that one, too. So it's almost like you're letting people know, listen, are there too far gones, TFGs? Yes, I came up with the term TFG.
Which I borrowed, by the way.
Of course they exist. They absolutely exist, bro. But it's like, I'd say worst case scenario, you're dealing with like 40% of the country, but I think it's probably closer to 25%. Maybe we settle somewhere in the middle, 33.8%. I don't know, but it's really not that many people. And so that means that if we take the approach of doing what I'm advocating for, I think you get people who are incredibly political and disagree with you, some of them to change their mind. People who slightly disagree with you, you get them to come to your side. People who are apolitical, you get them to come to your side. So it's just, you'd be surprised what happens with human psychology. And I think maybe the main thing that we're getting stuck on here is the idea that, like, here's my philosophy of changing people's minds. It's not an overnight thing. Like, it's never like the the bubble pops over their head and it says, like, I have been wrong about everything to this point. No, it's a long process, dude. Maybe somebody starts with their first Secular Talk or Humanist Report or Progressive Voice video all the way back in 2015. And when they started, they're like, I don't know, man, I vote Republican. My favorite host, I tune into Bill O'Reilly every night. Was he on the air in 2015? I don't know. He's probably still on, but like towards the tail end.
Sure.
well,
Yeah.
whatever it is, then it's like maybe you talk to that person who was, kind of, they would call themselves a moderate Republican back in 2015, and then now they're full blown, Justice Democrats, rah rah, love AOC. Like these things happen. And actually, by the way, I don't know if he'd want me to share this, but nonetheless, I'm going to share it. It happened with my brother-in-law, man. My brother-in-law was a Republican. He was a Republican. And then I don't know, at some point he decided, let me see what my brother-in-law is up to. I know he's got a YouTube channel. Let me watch a couple of his videos. Fast forward to today, watches every video, loves politics, texts me about it all the time. He was a Republican, and now he's a social democrat, Bernie Sanders supporting guy. So we're selling ourselves short, is my point. And the only mistake we can really make is to do the thing that the person who you quote tweeted is doing. Like the screen grab gotcha-isms and the guilt by association and the shaming. That's the one thing we can't do. The more we're open and the more that we are willing to, and again, my point is don't concede any ground on the actual substance. Any ground at all. I'm the most uncompromising person ever when it comes to my principles and my policies. I'm as rigid as it gets on that stuff. But that's just the point. It's on that stuff. In terms of tactics, in terms of strategy, in terms of discussion, the opposite. It's anything goes because I actually believe that in the long run, we're going to win.
Yeah, and I think that to kind of bring it to a close here, I think that what we would both agree on, and what's kind of this whole conflict that we're having is kind of embedded in this broader point that the left has a marketing problem. The right has a very disciplined marketing machine. The left does not. Like, if you just think about like Democrat versus Republicans, within that Democratic side are so many factions. You have progressives versus centrists, and then within progressives, there's factions. So we can't all unite under the banner of just one thing, There's so many different people with different voices because the left just is more intellectually diverse than the right. So I think that it is that we have a serious and just fundamentally bad marketing issue. And that's what's making all of these issues surface and bubble up to the top really in the first place. And I think you probably would agree with that.
I do agree with that. And I think it's a struggle for us to kind of create a similar machine in the way that they do, and a way to stay on message and spread our ideas more. And I actually am almost totally lost hope for politicians to get that right. But in terms of media people like us, I think we're closest to getting it right. And I think that that's the ideal scenario. The ideal scenario is that we get, a kind of on-sound message that resonates and that is kind of universal. And it can kind of even unite the factions of the fractured left. But I think one of the things in order to do that is going to have to be like a commitment to not just free speech, but to in opposition to cancel culture, if you will, and embracing people in their flaws and accepting half allies for what they are. And again, never compromising away on our principles and our policies and our beliefs, but not, cutting off our nose to spite our face in the long run. And so I hope that in the case of somebody like Joe Rogan, who's willing to have these conversations, like I hope that you go on his show, Sahil goes on his show, and we can get all of the left-wing commentators on there, because kind of what you just alluded to, the right has the very consistent echo chamber, and they're able to get their message out there more as a result of it. And oftentimes, sometimes through self-inflicted wounds, sometimes not, we're kind of left in our own little corner of the internet, the left, jerking each other off, talking about how awesome we are. And I want more than that for us.
All right, so is that the final word from you guys on this issue?
I'd say so. You want to say anything, or are you going to pretend to be Switzerland too the rest of the debate?
Take a side, Sahil.
I don't know.
Your side.
No,
That's
so I'll throw something in there. So on the Glenn Greenwald situation, I felt like his last appearance was kind of whack, because if you watch the clip, like, he goes on there and he just is solely shitting on MSNBC and CNN. And you can watch Tucker Carlson basically jizzing in his pants when he asks him his question. And he's like, yeah, well, he's like, oh, should they be fired or laid off or whatever? And then Glenn Greenwald is like, oh, I don't know if they will be, but blah, blah, blah. And I think that if you go on Fox News, you should be adversarial and you should be like, going after what they're saying like you did in your appearance. But if you're going to go on Fox News and just be a tool for them, that's fucked up, dude. You're going on there and you're basically being used by them to shit on the left. And I thought that wasn't okay, personally.
Okay, on that one I disagree with you because it's a point of principle. If the thing that you're discussing happens to be an issue where they stumbled across the proper position, albeit for incredibly partisan and hacky reasons, like no matter what the findings of the Mueller report were, they were going to say, Donald Trump vindicated, and they were going to do the rah-rah Republican line. Now, guess what? A broken clock is right twice a day, and it happened to be right at this one time. And Glenn Greenwald went on, as a matter of principle, to talk about an issue where he was correct. And of course, really who we should be shaming in this conversation is CNN and MSNBC for not having on Glenn Greenwald or Ron Yakalik or myself or Jimmy Dore or Michael Tracy or you, Mike. Like, that's where our anger should really be directed. Now, I get what you're saying. If a lefty ever goes on Fox News and agrees with Fox News on something where they shouldn't be agreeing with them, then I totally agree with your criticism, Sahil. But when it comes to this particular issue, because it's just objectively true that Glenn was right and that they were willing to entertain that narrative, I can't get mad at him for that.
But it's on a platform that's literally the arm for the Republican Party.
But
so you're aiding them in a way.
Like we were talking about before, first of all, if Tucker Carlson brought up something that wasn't true and wasn't in the scope of that, like I brought up, if for whatever reason, his comments came up, I guarantee you Glenn would press him on that. And again, what you're discounting is the notion that now Glenn Greenwald, in the eyes of some percentage of those Fox viewers, oh, look at this, he's a principled guy on the left, telling it like it is. Well, then now what happens when there's some other issue that comes up and they're interested in Greenwald's work and they're reading his tweets and they find themselves agreeing with certain left-wing positions and becoming further left than they were before?
I don't think there are that many people who end up going in that direction, though. Honestly, I'd be surprised if there were really any of those people.
But every person is worth it, no? Isn't it worth it? Even if you get one more person to be further left-wing and then you change one person's mind from being an idiot far right-wing voter to now voting for Bernie Sanders in the primary, I think that's worth it.
I mean, if it's such a small number, no. If I were in Glenn Greenwald's position, I'd feel like complete shit, personally. But I don't think there are that many people. Dude. I don't think they're that. But it's not about partisan, though. It's just about. It is.
You're literally saying they were the Republican arm, and you went on there and you agreed with them. Heaven forbid.
It's the platform that's the arm for the Republican Party, and you're going on and shitting on the left. Again, if you want to go on somewhere and do that, and I'm always down for shitting on CNN and MSNBC, but you're going on the platform of a dude like Tucker Carlson, and you're being used as a tool for him. That's not like, why would you do that? And I don't think there are that many people who'd be switched by their ideology, because what I view is that people are going to look at that and just be like, wow, my position is even more correct because there's this lefty guy who's coming on.
Most of them will.
I think the vast majority
that won't is worth it.
I don't even think they're like, I can't even imagine how many people would not take that view.
Dude, there's millions of people watching Fox News. Not all of them are totally hopeless. And if you think they are, then you and Hillary Clinton will sit down and have a nice meal together and chat it out about how everybody who doesn't agree with you already are irredeemable deplorables.
That's not what I'm saying, though. I'm telling you, in that situation, going on Fox News to convert people is different than going on and being like, yeah, man, I agree with you 100%.
A week before, he did the bravest fucking thing I've ever seen in my life.
That was good. That was good.
And he's getting fucking death threats and putting his life in his hands. And now the claim is, oh, you're just a tool. I'm pretty sure Glenn Greenwald knows what he's doing. And I'm pretty sure that in the 1 out of 100 instances where he happens to go on Fox News and explain how, yes, on Russiagate he was right, and on Russiagate mainstream media was wrong, I'm pretty sure he knows what he's doing, and I'm pretty sure he's correct. And I'm pretty sure that this doesn't have any sort of, like, it's not like Glenn Greenwald all of a sudden is going to, help Fox News further? No, his whole thing is to go in there and tell the truth. And if at 1 out of 100 times it happens to be, okay, you got one right, that's not a bad thing. That's okay.
my criticism is specifically pertained that I thought the Bolsonaro thing was good, but that should be what he's doing. So I felt like when I watched the clip of him on there,
and bring up. Okay, so the topic was Russiagate. What do you want him to go in there and argue something that's incorrect on Russiagate just to disagree? That's so hacky. Why would he do that?
I know. I certainly wouldn't advocate that. I mean, don't talk about it on there. Or you could talk about it and then add in some sort of a caveat that you're on the Republican arm, of media. But you don't have to go on there to talk about that.
I've seen, by the way, I've seen him do the thing that you're advising him to do. I've seen him do that a zillion times on Fox News, where he'll say like, oh, and the media has consistently gotten this wrong, including the network that I'm on right now. Like, he does that all the time. So, but this is what I mean, Sahil, is that you seem, the thing that bothers you more is it's partisanship. It's like, okay, well, they're with the baddies, and this host is with the baddies, and this guy's going to go and talk to the baddies like, how dare he? That's just stupid. That's so sloppy and lazy. Who cares? Who gives a fuck? Like, just focus on the issues, get it right, and then also it has the upside of, while many people, you're right, most of them are not going to change their fucking mind, they're still going to hate the left. But if in the long run you convert one person, a dozen people, 100 people, 5,000 people, that's absolutely worth it. And if we don't do that, then we keep losing to fucking idiots and monsters.
Yeah, no, I get that. But again, I think that it's magnifyingly small, the amount of people that would be changed. I don't even know if there are any who are changed or will be changed. But going on there, if you're going to go on there to change people's minds, go on there to have an appearance like you did, not what he did recently.
No, listen, the world is complicated. So if I'm invited on to talk about certain issues and I have to, because as a matter of principle and as a matter of policy, I know the position I'm going to be taking is counter to the network, then yeah, I'm going to do that. But on Russiagate, where they want me to go in there and they want me to tell the truth, yeah, I'm sorry. The truth happens to be the Democratic Party totally fucked it up. CNN totally fucked it up. MSNBC totally fucked it up. And Fox News was less shitty, albeit for totally partisan, hacky reasons. But yeah, my truth comes first, man. Truth comes first. You have to always start with the truth, and then everything else comes after. If you don't start with the truth, then, we're not on the same planet here. And all Glenn Greenwald did was go on there and tell the truth. And I don't think that there's any negative effects that a lot of people think there are. And I do see that he just got like ruthlessly smeared. And, there's like allegations of like he's a closet right winger or something. And it's just silly. And it's below the people who are making that point.
I'm curious to know your guys' point on this issue, because a couple of weeks ago, there was this big kerfuffle about the DNC not agreeing to debate on Fox News. And I think a large part of the argument against them debating was that if you go on stage on Fox News, even if it's all Democrats getting out the Democratic Party message, you're still legitimizing a news network that has no credibility. So for me, I actually sided with that argument. And I'm curious to know your guys' thoughts on that, because you can kind of, I think, in some ways apply that to Glenn Greenwald, even though that's a very narrow and specific anecdote. Because in one way, he can go on, and just the fact that you're going on, if you're not attacking the right, then you're kind of adding to their credibility. You're letting them boast about how many left-wingers they bring on. So I'm curious to know your guys' point about that, because I kind of feel like it's relevant, even if maybe tangentially, because there is this notion that, how do we handle Fox News if we all know that they're not credible? And it's a matter of how do we respond if you know they're bad faith actors, if you know they have no legitimacy, and does us going on there and debating, or the Democratic Party debating, does that make them seem more credible than they are? So that's kind of what I was struggling with, and why, because I would agree that they should not debate on Fox, which is why it kind of led me down the route of thinking Glenn Greenwald should not have gone on to talk about Russiagate. Yeah.
Well,
so I'm curious.
Well, I did a segment on this too, and I encourage everybody to check out Mike's segment on that, and I encourage everybody to check out my segment on that. But yeah, I was totally torn on that. Because on the one hand, you're right. They are not a news organization. They're just not. They're talk radio with assholes with ties on. Okay? They're not credible. Oftentimes, they're liars. They're total partisan hacks. They're propaganda arm of the Republican Party. So yes, they are not that. And the argument from the DNC is not unreasonable. And that's their argument. Their argument is they're not serious. This isn't, you aren't what you say you are, so we're not going to pretend like you are. So I'm not against what the DNC said, but I just think they're also obtuse to the other side of that argument, which I also find convincing. And the other side of that argument is, who gives a fuck what they are? Go in there and run shit. And yes, even though it's only the tiniest of numbers of people who might watch and go, they made some good points. I like that person, or I don't like that person. There are still some of them. There are any group of people that you get like that. See, when you poll Republicans, what do we find? 51% of them want Medicare for all. Like, what the fuck? What is that? What are you talking about? That's crazy. I thought that all of them were, like they're all got concrete in their heads. No, turns out when you get specific and you actually make your case, they'll often go, yeah, okay. Like, I'm kind of with you on that. So that's the other school of thought. The other school of thought is, I know what they are, but I don't care what they are, because I'm going to go in there and I'm in the lion's den, but yeah, I'm going to talk to the people in the audience, knowing that 85 to 90% of them are going to hate me no matter what I say. Fine, I'll take it. Because the other 15%, that's enough to justify me coming out here and doing this and pushing these important issues and maybe getting some votes from the people in the audience. And I think that, I'm just saying, I see both sides of that. And I think that when people don't, they're like, come on, you have to see that. Do you not? I know you see that, Mike. You can see both sides of that argument.
I'm genuinely torn.
Yeah. But a lot of people will pretend like, and not to throw them under the bus, but I'm going to. TYT didn't pretend to see, they didn't see both sides of that argument. They took the totally partisan, very like close-minded position of like, no, they're totally right. The DNC is totally right. And it's like, did you even think about the counter arguments to this? Or are you just, going out there and fucking throwing a tantrum? And the answer is the latter. That's what they did. And, again, I don't have all the answers here. All I'm saying is this is obviously not a one-sided thing. And
it's really utility.
Tough. There's utility and value in both of those things.
Yeah, and it's a struggle, which is why I actually think it was really helpful for us, Kyle, to kind of have this like public discussion, even though we talked,
totally hopeful.
Because it's a struggle. Like I'm going to repeat myself. I don't think there's like a clean takeaway. Like, this is a battle. It's an ongoing conversation, and you and I can't solve it. It's hard. You know what I mean?
No, it's not solvable.
Difficult.
It's not solvable. There's no way it's solvable. But yeah, inevitably now I will be a naive idiot for emboldening the right, and you will be an authoritarian social justice warrior. Yeah. So I'm like a free speech bro who doesn't understand the struggles of like marginalized people, and I'm emboldening the right, and you're just a censorious social justice warrior authoritarian trying to shut up anybody that doesn't agree with you.
That's so true. We kind of shared just in DMs like the different responses that we got from the opposite side, and it was just that. Like
I can't read mentions.
People can't acknowledge that we're both arguing in good faith. And that does worry me, because it's like people who watch your show and my show, like, we agree on what, like, fucking 99.9% of the issues. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's like you don't have to take a side. You can see that there's really a lot of gray area, and we're kind of battling in the gray area because we don't know. Like, there's too much dust as you're fighting, and maybe when we step back a year from now, we'll see when the dust clears. We're struggling with it in the open because we don't know that there's a right answer. Otherwise, we would agree, because we do agree on pretty much every fucking thing ever.
Yeah, and probably the criticism that annoys me more than any other criticism, that triggers me to no end, is the insistence that, like, oh, you just don't get like the other side of it or something. And it's like, people just will not digest the idea of like, no, I get it. Like, I see exactly what you're saying. I see the nuances of your argument, and I don't agree. Like, they don't accept that. They're just like, no, you just have to you just don't get it. It's like, no, I get it, and I don't agree. What do you?
And that's what we did. Like, you talked about the part of the problem thing, and I said, well, I don't agree, but I do understand what the point you're making, and how I need to repackage that message. So people have to be able to have these conversations. Like, if you and I just have the same fucking like segment over and over, and we always repeat the same stuff that each other says without like the point is that because we disagree, that's why it's so important, or because we agree on 99.9% rather, which is why it's so important for us to discuss this, and I think openly so, because it is tough. It's not black and white. It's a complicated question that does not have an answer to.
Yeah, it is. And I think on that note, we can wrap up.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So it was a good discussion. Hopefully people will keep it pretty civil, and we'll see how people respond. But do want to give you guys thank you for having this discussion. Is there any last words either of you guys want to say?
No. Thanks for having us, though.
I
Really
do have a last word. If I see any videos titled Mike Razor Fisted by Kyle, I will be so upset.
I didn't razor fist you, man. I didn't go hard on you.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It'll be like, even if Ben Shapiro, for example, is debating someone and it's not really anything that happened that was big, it'll be Ben Shapiro destroys.
That's true.
If I see it, Kyle destroys Mike, I'm coming at you.
No, because let me tell you something. The person who would post a video like that, tongue in cheek, is Progressive Voice. And he doesn't agree with me on this. He more agrees with you. So there's gonna be no Kyle Kulinski.
You're safe, man. You're safe.
Yeah, you're good. Don't worry.
I'll be watching Progressive Voice. If I see that fucking title, man, I'm coming after you. And by the way, I still love you, Corin, even though you told me to fuck off.
Yeah,
I
he
know.
called you out, dude. He said,
I'm
fuck
like, bro,
you.
chill, it's all good. He's my boy.
Subscribe for it. Come on, man. What the fuck? You left me hanging.
Oh my god.
One of the reasons I love talking to Corin is that, like, he'll start out on something disagreeing with me, and then I talk for like a minute and a half, and he's like, nah, you're totally right. He's just like, yeah, yep, you got it.
I love Corin. That shit was funny because I'm like, okay, yeah. Or Corin kind of is, he's arguing from my point of view.
He started out with you, and then I spoke a lot, and he was like, okay, yeah, fuck him. I'm like, no, don't fuck him. It's okay.
I'm like, Corin, what the fuck, man? I'm a fan. I still love you, Corin.
Yeah, he doesn't mean that shit. You know that.
No,
knows. Yeah.
All right, thanks, guys. Really appreciate
Anyway,
it.
all right, guys. Peace out.
Okay.